Dave Thomas here once again, and today I'm building the Rocketarium AMRAAM. This is a mid-power 24mm single-stage rocket. It actually goes together fairly easily. The tricky part for this particular rocket is putting on all of the scale decals and getting all those in the right spots and such. And so that's really what's going to take up most of your time if you're going to build this according to the recommended specifications. Now, as always, you could paint this hot pink with purple polka dots, and that's up to you. But there is quite a bit of detail involved in the decals for this particular rocket. Now, as with any rocket, we want to go through and make sure that all of our parts are here. So first of all, we've got several decals here. So one long strip, a smaller strip here, another strip of just blue stripes. And then moving on to the parts themselves, we have a motor mount assembly bagged by itself, a bag of fins, another bag with the ejection baffle, alright, and then a small parts bag here. This contains the shock cord, the launch lugs, some detail pieces that will go on the fin, and this is important here, some plasticine clay or modeling clay. There should be at least 8 grams here. Do not lose this, and be sure to install it correctly. This is going to add some weight to the nose that will keep the rocket stable. If this is not in the nose cone and you've not put some other weight in the nose, then the rocket may not fly safely. So don't forget that. All right, then we have a nose cone and a tail cone, parachute, and then 2 body tubes. We have a main body tube here and then an upper body tube here that will contain the parachute. And then finally we get a little applicator stick here for putting glue up inside those tubes. So it looks like we have everything. I can't stress enough here to make sure that you go through the directions fully before assembling the kit, and always dry fit your parts before putting on glue. So I'm going to clear this away and we will get started. I've unpacked the parts in the motor mount bag, and so we've got 2 rings here, and note one of them here actually says down on it. So this is going to be the lower ring, and it's beveled just a little bit here so that it fits inside the tail cone here. Rocketarium advises using wood glue for putting all this together, including these plastic parts. And that's why there are a lot of channels and ridges in here, because these will hold the glue. And as you'll see in the instructions, they recommend using a lot of glue here. And usually we try to avoid getting really sloppy with the glue, but the excess glue is going to fill in these grooves here, and that's what's going to lock the plastic in place against the wood and the cardboard parts. Okay, so starting with the thrust ring here, this is going to go inside, and I'm just dry fitting this right now. Alright, and so we'll eventually glue up inside here, but this spacer will then push that thrust ring to its needed spot. So when it's flush here, the thrust ring is in the correct position here. And then this is something that I've found so far unique to Rocketarium's models, is the tip of the engine hook at the forward end here always goes right on top of the thrust ring instead of behind it like most models do. It's kind of a neat way to do it. It gives it a little bit more strength, but it does make it a little trickier when putting it in there. Alright, and then this, once glued, is going to fit into the tail cone like this. Now, when it's fully assembled, the engine hook will come out this slot here, and then the centering ring here marked down, that will go over the motor mount and the engine retainer clip, and it's going to fit right up against the forward edge of the tail cone there, and it'll be flush with it. Okay, and then the last thing we'll do is put on the forward ring, and it doesn't have any directionality to it. And then this whole assembly, once dry, will fit up into the main body tube. Alright, so now we'll put it all together with glue. So the first thing I'm going to do is find a spot 3/4 of an inch or 19 millimeters inside either end. So I'm just going to measure this off here. That's 19 millimeters there. And this is simply a glue spot, so I'm just going to mark it there so it's easier to find. And then I'm going to take the little applicator here, put some glue on that. Okay, and then I'm just going to use my thumbnail here to measure where that is, and I'll just smear this around the inside. Okay, and I'm going to use a little more glue. We don't want that thrust ring to move on us. And so once again here I'm just going to find my mark. Okay, and I can use it to move the glue around there a bit. Okay, I don't want to get it down too far, but if a little bit falls down there, the thrust ring will push it back up. So now I'm going to take my thrust ring, put that in the aft end, opposite end of where I have my glue. Put my spacer in here, and I'm just going to push that down. And that pushes the glue ahead of it. And now we want to immediately take this out so that if there is any glue on the inside, we don't glue this into the tube. And now we're just going to let this sit and dry for a few minutes before going on to the rest of the engine mount. Now I've just let this dry for a minute or two, enough that the ring isn't going to go moving on me right away. And now we need to put in the engine clip, and that needs to be 95 millimeters or 3 3/4 inches from the aft end. Okay, so I'm going to measure here. Alright, so 95 millimeters is right here. Just look inside, it looks pretty even with what I want. So now I'm just going to cut a slit at that line, and I should be doing this, it should come out right above that thrust ring. Come down just a bit. Alright, so if you look inside there, there's my knife, and it's right at the forward edge. And you can actually, if you're careful, you can kind of feel this as the knife's going in. So where my mark was like 1/2 millimeter off, and I could feel the resistance of the ring there. So just moved it up a little bit. Alright, so now that clip simply goes in here. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and let the glue entirely dry before we go on to installing this into the tail cone. The glue is completely dry on my thrust ring now, and so we'll go ahead and glue the motor mount tube into the tail cone here. And so to do this, we're going to put a heavy bead of glue inside these lower sets of rings here. So if you're looking at this from the other side, we've got an outer set of grooves here which will glue into the body tube. And then this inner set is where the motor mount's going to go. And this is going to get a little sloppy. We'll need to clean it up when we're done. And so I'm just going to take some wood glue here. And I'm going to start just by placing a bead of glue all the way around here. I'm going to try not to get it in the slot for the engine hook. And now I'm just going to use my finger and fill in all those grooves so that we have a goodly amount here. Because we want the grooves filled so that when the glue dries, that's going to hold everything in. Alright, and now my motor mount's going to go in, and I need to make sure the clip lines up with the slot here. Alright, I'm going to slide that in. Now look, I've got a whole bunch of glue coming out, and we don't want that. So take a tissue, paper towel, finger, and thoroughly wipe that out. Otherwise the motor's not going to fit correctly. Okay, and I got a little on the outside here. We'll go ahead and take that off as well. Alright, now my glue is still wet here, and we don't want it to dry. So now we're going to go over here, and we want a rim of glue, or a ring of glue on the motor mount here. And it's showing about 2.9 inches down. Basically we want a ring of glue right around here so that this bottom centering ring, aft centering ring, will fit over that. Okay, so we're going to add some glue here. And it doesn't matter if you get a little bit on the hook there. And I'm also going to put some glue on this rim right here. And here again we want it to fill it, but we don't want so much that's slopping all the way down the bottom of the tail cone here. Alright, so now I'm just going to place this. There's a little tab there, a little slot for that to go in. And remember, this has a down written on the aft side of this. So this is going to come down, go through the layers of glue, and then into the glue we put around the rim. Alright, if there's any excess there, we'll just wipe that off quickly. Okay, and now we can let this all dry. While the tail cone is drying, we'll go ahead and assemble the baffle. And this comes in its own little package here. And it has its own instructions. Alright, so, and some of the parts might be inside the coupler there, so if you can't find something, look inside there. Alright, so we have the forward side here that has a small hole in it, and to that we're going to attach this screw eye. And so to do that, we'll simply squirt a little glue into the hole and around it. And now I'm just going to screw this in. And I screwed it in just till I can barely see the threads on the eye side of it. And then on the other side, I'm going to add a little bit more glue and completely cover the threads. And this is just to give it a little more strength. Nothing's going to come in contact with this except hot exhaust or ejection gases. Okay, we're going to put a relatively thick bead of glue here, so I'm going to add to what I just put in. Spread it just a little bit. And I'm going to put this inside. I did this backwards before this, not on the video, so that's why there's a little bit of glue on this. Alright, so I'm going to leave just a little bit of room there. And then I'll take my glue again and add a fillet. There we go. And then take a tissue or paper towel and clean off any material on the outside here, as that could keep it from sliding in correctly. Okay, my glue's not completely dry, but it's set enough that we can work with it. And so here on the other side that will have the screw eye baffle on it, we're going to make a wider, thinner band of glue here. So it's thick to begin with, but we're going to squish that out here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this in kind of sideways and then straighten it and pull it back toward the edge. Okay, and again I'm leaving a little bit of room there for a fillet. And what this is going to do is, except right where we slid it in on the edges there, it'll automatically make a fillet here, and it's doing it to a lesser extent on the interior side. So now I can just fill in the fillet. Okay, and if you got a little excess glue that's getting down at the holes like that, you can take a small dowel here. You don't even necessarily have to get all the glue out, just smear it around so it's not blocking the holes. There we go. Okay, and now I'll let that completely dry, and we can go back to working on the engine mount. So my glue is set on the aft centering ring and the tail cone here, and everything still looks nice and straight. And so the only thing left here is to put the forward centering ring on, and this does not have any taper to it, so you can put this on any direction. And here we're just going to run a bead of glue right above the insertion point for the engine hook, and then we'll push the centering ring down just over the top of the engine hook there, and so this will force it into its own little fillet here. Just line up with the notch, and then I can smooth out the fillet here on the back side. Okay, and then if you want, you can go ahead and add a fillet of glue to the front of the forward centering ring there, and also to the front of the aft centering ring, just to reinforce them. Again, it's not going to hurt anything if you get a little glue up here on the engine hook, because it won't stick. And actually, in this area, it's not bending anywhere anyway. Moving a little bit there. Alright, so now I've got all the fillets in place. I'm going to just check this quickly and make sure we're reasonably straight. And now I'll set this aside to dry completely. Now left from the package is this, and this orange ring is an adapter so that you can put a D-sized engine into the engine mount tube here. This is sized for an E-sized black powder engine. And so if you need to put a D in there, this spacer goes in first to make up for the difference in length. For now, I'm just going to set this aside in my launch box, and I'll use it when I need it. Our next step is to mark the body tube for the fins and the launch lug. So we just need to cut out this fin marking guide from the back of the instructions. And take the longer of the two body tubes. We'll simply wrap this around one end. And whichever end we use here, that's going to become the aft end of the rocket. So I'm just going to take a piece of tape here, tack that in place for a bit. Alright, and so we're going to have 4 fin lines here. And then the A point, this is our launch lug line. I'm just going to mark out a little LL. We'll do the same for the shorter tube, except that we won't need the launch lug line. So we'll just mark fin lines here. And then using a straight edge or a door frame, something like that, we're going to run the fin lines about 2/3 of the way up the rocket for the main tube, and then the launch lug line will go all the way along the length. So I'm going to use my handy dandy fin marking guide here. Now, because this rocket has forward canard fins on it, that moves the center of pressure too far forward to keep the rocket stable. And so we need to move the center of gravity forward at the same time. And the way that Rocketarium has chosen to do this is to add weight in the form of this plasticine clay into the nose cone. And here they've pre-drilled the nose cone to give us more access to this. And so the instructions recommend just pulling off kind of pea-sized, it's a big pea, pea-sized pieces of clay and just dropping them down there. And having the drilled out nose really helps. I've done this type of thing where you just have the little fabrication hole left in there. It takes a much longer time. All right. With this, I can just drop them all in. If for some reason yours did not come with a pre-drilled nose cone, you can either drill it out yourself, or you can simply make smaller balls there to drop them in. Regardless, once you get them down there, you need to press them all the way down into the tip of the nose cone. I'm going to use a dowel. You could use a pencil. Any other type of this type of tool would work fine. And so I'm just, you can't see this inside the nose, but I'm just moving it around the circumference of the nose as I'm moving up and down, pounding that into the very tip. And this is fairly sticky. Under normal use, you shouldn't have to do anything else to this. You don't need to add glue or anything to it. If you choose to use something other than the clay here for the nose weight, make sure it's at least 8 grams and that it's capable of staying all the way up there in the tip of the nose. If this were to shift backward, that would change the center of gravity again, and we might run into stability issues. All right, and then the instructions tell us to wash this off with a little bit of soap and water. Before I do that, I'm going to check one other thing here. There is a bit of a seam here, and so I would recommend sanding this because we're going to need to paint it a bit. And it looks like they did a little bit of shaving here to remove some of the seam, and you can see some of the marks there if the light's just right. So since we're directed to wash this with some soapy water, rinse it off, I'm going to go ahead and sand this first with a little bit of 220 grit sandpaper, and then go ahead and wash it off. Now when you do wash this, take care not to get any water down inside the nose there. Okay, so that's good for now. If we need to fine-tune this when we get to the finishing stage of the model, you can do that as well. But I'm going to go ahead and take this, wash it and rinse it, and we'll come back. Now while we're still waiting for glue to dry on the motor mount, and we've done the nose cone, we can look ahead a little bit here to our fins, because before we put the fins on, you'll need to decide how you want to treat them. Now these appear to be basswood or basswood instead of balsa, and so they have a much tighter grain, and these won't require as much filling and sanding sealer as a balsa fin would. And then we also need to decide how accurate you want to make this. So if you want to make this true to scale, then the fins will require a multi-tapered type of sanding scheme, and this is shown in the back. So if you go to the next to the last page here, opposite the parts list, it shows a tapering scheme here for both types of. This is the root edge, and so what they are showing here is you would taper first along this edge, okay, from corner to kind of perpendicular to the corner. So you'd sand it this way, and then you'd sand across this way, being very careful not to ruin your root edge here. But this would actually be tapered on the root edge in here. But you want to make sure that the actual root edge still remains flat. And then finally you would taper the very leading edge up in here. And then for the upper fins, these would simply be tapered across their leading edge here. Okay. Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, this makes it look really accurate. It'll also make it fly faster and higher. The drawback is, though, that those tapered edges are more fragile. So, if you would prefer to make this more of a sport scale model rather than a true scale model, then all you need to really do is treat the leading edges by either giving them a short taper or by rounding them. Okay, just even doing this improves the aerodynamics quite a bit, even if you don't fully airfoil the whole thing. Alright, that's what I'm going to do, just because I've had too many fractured fins. So I will just taper around the leading edges. My engine mount and tail cone assembly here are completely dry. So now we just want to first of all dry fit this into the main body tube. Okay, and that fits all right. When we put this in, we want to find the seam here. Okay, so here's the seam. I don't know if you can see that in the video. And we just need to be able to align that with one of our fin marks here. Doesn't matter which one. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this out again. Now, according to the instructions, we're going to glue this in 2 sections, but at the same time. So we need to put a ring of glue up inside here, and that will secure the forward ring, and then we will also put glue around the tail cone here, and that's what these other grooves are for, is to hold the glue, and then we'll slide the whole thing in and glue it at once. So I am going to take my ruler here and 2 7/8. Okay, so that's going to be about there. So I'm just going to hold my thumbnail here on my applicator. Okay, and I'm just going to put some glue on this. And then using my thumb as a stop, I can apply glue to the inside here. Okay, and then just keep checking until we've got glue all the way around. And I'm sorry I can't really show this. I don't have a good angle on the camera. Alright, but I'm just checking inside here, so I've got the glue there. Just going to put my excess glue here. Alright, and then I'm going to run glue all the way around this. And just like we did on the inside of the tail cone, we want to fill these grooves. And be warned, there probably will be some glue that squirts out. We'll want to clean that up right away. Okay. Alright. So I'm going to find that seam once again, right there. Right, and now I'm just going to push this in. I can feel that ring of glue inside, and as I suspected, we're going to have a lot of glue to clean up here. Okay, so just be very quick about this and clean up the glue before it starts to solidify. Okay, and I'm just going to check my line again. That's where it needs to be. Now I'm just going to let that dry for a few minutes, and then we'll move on to coupling the tubes together. Now, in preparation for gluing the tubes together, we're going to need to find the center point of the coupler here that makes the ejection baffle. So we'll find that right there. Okay, and when we put this in, the non-screw eye end will go into the front of the main body tube. I'm just going to dry fit this for make sure everything works. And then the screw eye end goes into the aft end of the upper body tube. Okay, and then we'll just need to make sure we align all of our fin lines here. Now before we can put this into the upper body tube, we're going to have to affix the shock cord to it. And I'm going to go ahead and do this now before I put it on to either of the two body tubes. I'm doing it now just because it's a little easier to work with it before it's inside the body tube. So here I'm just going to double knot the shock cord onto the screw eye here. A couple of half hitches. Alright, and I'm going to pull this in both directions, make sure we're not coming out. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and cut off a little bit of the excess here. Do leave some on there so that it won't pull through. And then as just a little bit of an extra safety measure, I'm just going to put a little dab of glue on the knot. Don't use super glue for this because it will eat away at the rubber. But just a little bit of the wood glue, and I'm just going to work it into the knot there. And that's just to give a little extra protection against it pulling through. Okay, so now we can take the main body tube here, and I'm just going to run a bead of glue around the inside edge here. Okay, and again I'll find there's my halfway mark. So I'm just going to move this back and forth through the glue as I put it in. Okay, and then I'm going to stop right there at my mark. Now I'm going to let this sit for several minutes here so that when I put the upper body tube on, I don't accidentally squash this further down the tube. The glue has had time to dry inside the main body tube here, and so I'm ready to put the upper body tube on. And in preparation for this, I'm just going to feed the shock cord through the aft end and then up through the forward end here. And once more, I'm going to go ahead and check a dry fit. Okay, so this brings up something here. Although the directions told me to run the fin lines up only about 2/3 of the way, I'm going to want at least one to come up all the way so that I can use it to align the upper body tube with the lower one, so the fins are in alignment that way. So a quick return to my fin marking guide, and I've simply extended this line up. I've marked it here very small lettering as a fin line, and now that gives me something to align the upper body tube with. I can just find any of those fin lines, and that way I won't have to come back and redraw fin lines or end up with fins that are offset top to bottom. So now that everything's in place, I'm just going to turn this around a little bit, and I'm going to put a bead of glue inside here. While trying to keep the shock cord out of it. Alright, now I'm going to keep the shock cord taut as I move this into place. Alright, and here again I'm going to align with my fin lines. And I'm just going to move it back and forth a little bit to make sure the glue is spread. Okay, and then once that's aligned, I'm going to pull on the shock cord again, make sure it's not hanging in the glue. And now I'm going to let this dry, and then we'll come back to the fins. For my fins, I've decided on kind of a compromise between simply rounding the leading edge and doing the full taper all the way through. So what I have done here is I've tapered the two leading edges. So this is the short leading edge here, and then this is the main leading edge. And if we look at this in cross section, you can see I've tapered this here, and I've also tapered it this way. And the way I've done this is you really need to have a sanding block or a sanding tee, something like this, that gives you a hard flat surface. And then I'm just holding this at an angle, and this is best done on like the edge of a tabletop or something here. So I'm going to move the camera over just a little. So here at the edge of the tabletop, I can overhang the part that I'm working on, and then go ahead and sand this at an angle. I am using 100 grit sandpaper to do the initial shaping here. I'm just doing a little bit at a time and then flipping it over and doing the other side. This way, if I get a little bit off, I'll be able to correct it before it gets too bad. And that's actually the most difficult part about doing this, is keeping it symmetrical. Okay, so I can check my cross section here. Alright, and then I also check along here, and this may be difficult to see, but we want to make sure that this is all of uniform width here. So if you've got one edge that's narrow and the other edge that's really wide, then you need to put a little more pressure as you take the end of the stroke there. Okay, so I'm going to check cross section again. Do this just a little bit more, and then I'll round over the very edge. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I've got just a little bit of the flat edge left here, and now I'm just going to round this. So I'm just giving a twist of my wrist here as I go over this, and you can give it a little bit of forward motion as well. What I'm doing is rounding over that very last edge there that still has the laser scorch marks. So that now, in cross section, we get a taper ending in a rounded edge, giving us a nice airfoil there. Okay, and then if you need to, you can do a little bit more to keep that bilaterally symmetrical there. So I finished sanding my fins here, and I started out with 100 grit sandpaper to shape them and finished with 220 grit sandpaper, and the finish came out fine enough that I decided I probably don't need to use sanding sealer. I think the primer, when we get to the painting step, should be enough to fill the remaining grain. So the next thing we need to do is measure the fins against the lower part of the airframe here. And according to the directions, we want to set the fin so that the base is flush with the tail cone. And then we'll mark it right where the tip of the fins ends up. Okay, and just in case we have a little bit different lengths here after the sanding, I'm just going to mark these. So this is going to be fin 1, and then I can mark this. I'm going to mark it on the root edge here. That way when it's all assembled, nobody will know the difference. Okay, and then I'll simply turn this, line up my next fin here. Alright, and I will recheck those when I go to glue them on as well. Now for the upper fins here, I'm going to go ahead and mark them before I put on the other fins. And according to the instructions, we need to attach them 11 inches or 280 millimeters from the forward end of the airframe. Okay, so that would be up here. So very close, and the instructions also refer us to the decal page here. And so if we take a look at that, just to give yourself a little bit of visualization there. And so now I'm just going to turn this. And just do this now for each of the fin lines. Alright, and if you're doing this, watching this video before even starting to assemble the rocket, I would suggest that when you mark the fins on the main airframe tube, go ahead and mark them all the way up the length. I think it's going to make aligning the forward fins a lot easier. Next thing to do is to lightly sand the regions where the fins are going to go. And here I'm just going to use a little bit of 220 grit sandpaper, and this is just to take the gloss off of the glassine coating here. And so just right where the fins are going to go, this will allow them to attach easier. It gives the glue something to grip. Okay, and I like to do it just till I can't see the line anymore. That way I don't have to worry about redrawing lines. Alright, the launch lug area we will have to sand as well, but we'll wait till we get the fins on and move to placement of the launch lug. Now up here, for the forward fins, we want to do the same thing. And this is why I say, if you're doing this ahead of time, go ahead and extend your fin lines all the way up, because most of the fin is actually going to be down here. And in fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to pause for just a moment, and I'm going to extend my fin lines down so I can see where they're going to go. So that was an easy matter of just extending the lines using my straight edge. And here again, I'm just going to sand a little bit where those fins are going to be. I can just put this up here to give myself pretty much all the way down the line I drew is going to be fine. And when I get to those fins, I can extend my sanding if necessary. Okay, from here, this is pretty much going to be like any other rocket with butt jointed fins. So I'm going to apply some glue, let it get tacky, and then stick the fin back on here. So if you haven't seen me do this before, this is something the Rocketeers used to do a long time ago, and you don't see it too often. I'm not sure why. What I'm going to do is put a thin layer of glue here on the fin. And this is part of the trick. You don't want a huge amount of glue to start with, because it takes longer to dry. And for now, we want to just get the glue in place. All right, now remember, part of this is going to hang down, so I'm going to actually scrape off just a little bit of the glue there. And I'm going to put this on my line. Now I've got to make sure I got the right fin here. Alright, so this one is number 4. So I'm going to put this on the line, touch it down, and I'm going to bring it back up. I'm just going to let that set for about 60 seconds while the glue gets tacky. 60 seconds have gone by, and so now I'm going to reapply the fin so that the tacky glue on each edge now is going to stick to each other almost immediately. And here I'm going to check to make sure my fin is flush with the tail cone there. Okay, and now it's just a matter of making sure that is straight, both vertically and horizontally. And I'm going to let that dry for at least 20 minutes and then move on to the next fin, which I'll do off camera. This is also a good place if you have a fin alignment guide. This is a great rocket to use it on, simply because we do have 4 fins and 2 sets of them. Having one of those fin alignment guides can really speed up the process of applying the fins and also help get your fins on straight. So I'm going to go off camera here while I put on the other fins on the main part of the body tube. And then when I come back, we'll do the same thing for the forward fins. The glue on my aft fins has dried, and they've come out nice and straight. And so now we're going to do the same thing with the forward fins. And remember, we made marks earlier so that the tip of the fin will be just over the aft end of the upper body tube, but most is going to be down in here, okay, along the top end of the main body tube. These are going to go on the same way I just did the other ones. The only difference here is that the glue will go all the way down the length, since there's no overhang here. And once again, we don't want to use a lot of glue because we want it to dry fairly quickly. Later on, we'll be able to strengthen the glue with fillets. And so here, once again, I'm going to touch this to my fin line. And then allow that to dry for 60 seconds before replacing the fin. 60 seconds have gone by now, and I'm just going to go ahead and place this back on. And then once again, we'll check this to make sure it's both vertical and straight horizontally. And just as with the aft fins, I'm going to let this dry, and then we'll come back, do each of the other fins off camera, and I'll return to the video when those are done. Our next step after the fins is to apply the launch lugs. And these go on fairly simply. The first launch lug on the aft end will be flush with the aft end of the body tube here. Move this up. Okay, so one launch lug will go here and move forward. The other one needs to be 12 inches from the aft end. Okay, so it'll be right here. Now the launch lugs are in here with these other small parts. These are detail parts here that will go on the aft fins later on. I'll come back to that later, but in case you're wondering what those are, those go on the fins later on. So now I'm simply going to run a bead of glue along a launch lug here. And I'm going to apply this directly to the tube without waiting for tackiness like I did with the fins, because this simply doesn't have the leverage that's going to pull it over. And with using wood glue, this should adhere pretty quickly. Okay, and I'm just going to sight down it. Sure this is completely straight. And then I'll do the same thing for the forward launch lug. The base, or the aft end of this launch lug, is going to go at the mark I made at 12 inches up the tube. Okay, so that'll go right there. And in case you're wondering, that is a fin alignment guide around the forward fins, keeping those in place. Okay, and now I'm going to sight down both launch lugs and along my launch lug line, make sure everything lines up, which it does. So I will go ahead and let this glue dry as well, and when we come back here, we'll assemble the parachute. Next we're going to assemble the parachute, and most of the assembly has been done in the factory. All the shroud lines are attached. And here the instructions indicate tying the parachute directly to the nose cone. Now those of you who have watched any of my other videos know that I don't like permanently attaching parachutes to my rockets. I prefer to have them easily removable. So I'm going to make an addition here of a snap swivel that you can buy in just about any place that sells fishing supplies. And I'm going to attach my parachute to the snap swivel. So the first thing I'm going to do is simply gather up all the loops of the shroud lines here. And now I'm going to hold on to the center of the parachute on the outside. So this is where all the fold lines came together. And what I'm looking for here is that all of the corners line up close to, or preferably exactly the same. There's always a little bit of variation there. So once I've got that, on the other end here, I'm going to take my shroud lines that are around my finger and pinch those off into a loop so that they remain the same length. And now I'm just going to take the loop of the shroud lines, pass that through the swivel end of the snap swivel, open that loop once more, and then simply pass the entire snap swivel through and pull it taut. Now I'm going to recheck, make sure that I'm still straight and even here, and I appear to be. And so what I'm going to do here is just add a little drop of glue right here at the snap swivel, just so my shroud lines don't move. I'm just going to work that into the knot a little bit. You don't want a whole lot here, and you don't need any globs there. And now I'll set this aside to finish drying. And the advantage of this is I can remove the parachute easily. This will simply snap onto the nose cone. And this is something that you need to watch for. If you're going to use this method, make sure the snap swivel has a snap big enough to go around the eyelet of your nose cone. The actual size of the snap swivel from the recovery point of view doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Any size snap swivel is going to be strong enough for this type of a model rocket. But many of the smaller ones may not fit around the nose cone eye, and they do have to be large enough that you can lock it into place. So I will set this aside, let my little glue dollop dry there, and we're almost done with the assembly phase of the rocket. Both sets of fins are now in place, both the forward and the aft fins here. And I'm just going to take a quick look again and sight down them to make sure that they are all straight. This one is ever so slightly off, but I think I'm just going to put up with that. It's just not quite vertical, but if you're 5 feet away, you won't notice the difference. Okay, so next we're going to put fillets in here to strengthen the fins and reduce our interference drag a little bit. Now, when we do the aft fins, remember that I showed you these little guys here. Okay, and these are meant to go 1 inch from the aft end of the fin here, and there will be 1 on each side. Okay, and these are to simulate the pivot points that would be on the actual missile that allow the fins to be canted one way or the other and allow steering of the missile. Now, I just want to bring this up now because when we put fillets in here, that's going to interfere with the basically surface that these need to attach to. So the idea here is that these are going to be flush against the fin and the body tube, and even the little amount of glue that I've got in here now is preventing that from sitting flush. Now, according to the instructions, we don't apply these until after the paint. So when you apply your fillets, make sure you leave a little gap for these. Okay, so these are what they call fin shaft pieces, and they're going to be located at the edge 1 inch from the base of the fin. So I'm going to mark on here where to start and stop my fillets. So each one of these is right about 1 centimeter long. Okay, so an inch is roughly 2.5 centimeters, and that's going to be close enough for my purposes here. So I'm simply going to take each fin and mark. Give me a little bit of room here. All right, and mark that fin between 2.5 and 3.5. This will be the point where it goes. And I'm just going to continue this all the way around for each of the aft fins, and we'll need to do this on both sides. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the video here while I do the other side of each fin, and then we'll come back and put the fillets on. So now I've marked where each one of those fin shaft pieces is going to go. And I'm just going to put these back in the little bag here so I don't lose them. And set them aside. Oop, come back. Now, in looking at this, with an exception of this fin, most of these fins don't have any excess glue coming out behind this mark, the aft mark for the fin shaft. So I'm just not going to add a fillet down here. This will make it a little more realistic. If we wanted to be as realistic as possible, we wouldn't have any fillets on this, since these fins would normally swivel on that fin shaft in the real rocket. On the other hand, we don't want our fins coming off, so we're going to make a little compromise here. So for our fillets, these are going to be the same as we do for most fillets. So I'm just going to add a bead of glue here along each face. And then using my finger, I'm going to wipe that in. Now I'm not going to make these very thick, simply because I want to kind of keep the free fin idea here, that these fins would normally swivel and they wouldn't have a big fillet area. Now with the excess glue in my finger, I'm just going to move these forward. Okay. For the forward fins, we'll do the same thing, except we don't have to worry about the fin shafts in there, and I'm going to do that off camera. My fillets are drying, and really the only thing left to do before painting is to attach the shock cord to the nose cone, and this is simply done by putting a double knot in the shock cord after passing it through the eye there. Okay, so just a couple of half hitches here, one on top of the other. Now I'm not going to tie this down tightly here yet because when I paint this I want to keep the nose cone separate. The paint scheme on this is actually pretty simple. The main part of the rocket is a light gray and the nose cone is white. So it's just going to be easier for me to spray paint the nose cone separately. When you do get to the point though of tying this on before flight, do make sure that you keep a little bit of a free end here so that it doesn't slip through the knot, but not so much that it could get caught between the body tube and the nose cone. I also like to add just a little bit dab of glue and work that into the knot here. Just make sure you use white or wood glue, not cyanoacrylate, as that can eat away the rubber. One of the other last things we need to do is to add fillets to the launch lugs, and these will go on just like we did with the fins. So I'll just smooth this out. And then do the same thing on the aft launch lug. Now just let those dry, and structurally this rocket is done. We just need to finish it. Now I did mention earlier that the finishing portion of this rocket is probably the most tedious and most exacting, simply because there are so many very detailed decals. I'm going to include some links on tips for adding decals to rockets that are from another company. And in the near future, probably within the next month, I will be making a video on decals specifically for Rocketarium rockets. So be on the lookout for that. With that, have a great launch, have a safe recovery, and I'll be back next time.